Trump's, signaling to him, well, I've got to think again here. So I am going to send weapons to Ukraine. I didn't intend to do this. The Europeans, by the way, are going to pay for them. But I'm not going to be made look weak in this situation. So I think we could see a number of offensive weapons also supplied, and the Americans have supplied these, of course, before. But really, to put pressure on Putin, sanctions are not enough.
President Trump says he'll announce new measures on Russia and will send very sophisticated military equipment to Ukraine, including much-needed Patriot missiles. Trump also had a massive go at Putin on Sunday night.
We will send them Patriots, which they desperately need, because Putin really surprised a lot of people. He talks nice and then he bombs everybody in the evening. So there's a little bit of a problem there, and I don't like it.
Meanwhile, the UK has become the new #1 target for Russian cyber attacks and espionage. Let's talk to John Lough, Head of Foreign Policy at the New Eurasian Strategies Centre. Good afternoon, John.
Good afternoon. Good to be with you.
Let's start. What is the military equipment that Trump is talking about? He apparently may be considering sending offensive weapons.
Well, he's talking first and foremost about air defense systems and these much-needed Patriot missile systems that Ukraine has been using quite successfully to defend itself against ballistic missile attacks. But over recent weeks, we've seen a dramatic upswing in the number of air attacks, not just missiles, but drones, targeting a very wide range of Ukrainian cities and installations. And it's clear that if the Russians carry on at this level of intensity, they are going to do huge damage to Ukraine and could ultimately, I think, sap the will of the population to continue this fight. And that's clearly their goal. So
Sorry, carry on.
Trump has realized that his negotiating tactics with Putin so far haven't worked. So I think he's trying to turn the tables here and say, well, I offered you a chance to settle this war. And I think he offered Putin really a very good deal back in sort of February, March. And Putin didn't want to take it. So Trump's, signaling to him, well, I've got to think again here. So I am going to send weapons to Ukraine. I didn't intend to do this. The Europeans, by the way, are going to pay for them. But I'm not going to be made look weak in this situation. So I think we could see a number of offensive weapons also supplied, and the Americans have supplied these, of course, before. But really, to put pressure on Putin, sanctions are not enough. And we've seen that over the last 3.5 years. The Russian economy is definitely hurting. But we don't really have something in our armory that is going to just paralyze the Russian military effort, because we're not prepared to cope with a huge spike, for example, in the oil price. And the easiest way would be to try to cut off Russia's ability to export oil. That would come at enormous cost.
There's a lot of talking and writing about the drones and drone warfare. And I have read that the Russians have upped their capacity to produce these things, many of which are apparently not armed, they're decoys, but essentially what they are doing is soaking up the Ukrainian resource. How big a deal is that?
It's a huge deal. I mean, let's face it, on both sides, this drone warfare is developing very, very rapidly. At the outset of the war, Russia didn't have much drone capacity. It had to lean on the Iranians to supply drones and then, in fact, supply the industrial facilities to allow them to produce domestically. But they've since that time made, I think, very rapid strides in the development of these drones, which are able to carry much heavier payloads. So that means more destruction. The decoy systems you're referring to, the very sophisticated software, but in use on both sides. So they're both fighting this out. But if we continue at this level, then it really does seem that the Russians in this domain are able to outgun the Ukrainians for now. I mean, the Ukrainians are fighting back, and let's face it, they've been able to conduct some remarkable operations. The spiderweb operation that attacked the strategic bomber fleet in Russia is a prime example of that. So if it were to carry on, I think there has to be real concern just about the extent of the damage which Russia could carry out against Ukraine.
I know it's always unfair to invite people, no matter how well informed they are, to look inside the mind of Donald Trump, because that just seems an impossible maze to navigate. But at your best guess, do you think he was actually genuinely surprised by Russia's actions, or is that just part of the Donald Trump TV show performance?
I think that he might have been genuinely surprised in the sense that he felt that he was giving Putin a really very generous terms to exit this war, to get out of a really very uncomfortable situation. Putin thought this war would be over in a couple of weeks, and yet 3 years later, he was still slugging it out with the Ukrainians. Trump comes along and, offers him a kind of magic card to get out of it. So using Trump's logic, why would Putin not have taken that? So I think for him, it's hard to rationalize. Of course, he's had so many people telling him that Putin's intentions aren't sincere, but he seems to, brush those things aside and conclude, well, he knows this guy, he can see into his mind. And let's also face the fact that he may, in some respects, be able to understand Putin better than other world leaders because he's been used to dealing in the New York real estate market with some pretty dubious types, mafia bosses, and all that sort of thinking. So he's probably got a way of communicating with Putin, which is very different from that of Keir Starmer or President Macron or any other Western leader. So it's going to be very interesting to see how he plays this now, and whether he really does have, I think, the courage to take on Putin and say, well, look, if you're not going to play my game the way I offered it to you, we'll play another game. And I'm stronger than you in this respect. So what do you want to do now?
That's very interesting. This is the issue, I guess, of how to deal with gangsters. And as you say, anybody in the real estate business in New York will at some point have had to deal with that people in that industry. It's an interesting interpretation. A couple of months ago, we thought that it was plausible that there would be a movement towards some kind of deal. You examine this very closely, you follow it. Has that receded?
Yes, I think it has receded because Putin's made it very clear that he believes that he can fight to the end and that he can impose peace terms on Ukraine by simply forcing Ukraine to capitulate, in other words, to surrender. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't really see, or has concluded, that Trump doesn't feel strongly enough about Ukraine to stand in the way. And it may just be that Putin and his advisors have misread Trump here. And the White House, the situation in Congress right now, the fact that Senator Lindsey Graham has got 85 signatures on his draft bill to impose really draconian sanctions on countries that, for example, buy Russian oil and gas. This is never going to happen. 500% tariffs. But nevertheless, it shows that there is real dissatisfaction on the Hill in Washington, and Trump has to reckon with that. So Trump promised there would be some quick resolution to this war, and many of those people, I think, who've signed up with Lindsey Graham and others, they don't want to see the United States spending vast amounts of money having to fight a war in Europe when they think that is, in fact, the responsibility of the Europeans.
One quick last one, John. We gather that we being Britain, are target for Russian cyber attacks. Why did the Eye of Sauron fall on us?
I think the simple answer is that the Russians believe that the UK has still considerable influence in Europe, despite having left the European Union when it comes to matters of defense. As a nuclear power, it has a strong voice. And more than that, since the start of the full-scale war in Ukraine, it's played a big role in galvanizing the Europeans. And not just that, it also, I think, persuaded the Biden administration that they needed to deal more robustly with what was happening in Ukraine. So for that reason, the UK, is seen as a member of the awkward squad, and therefore deserves a certain level of treatment. And of course, it's much easier to go after the UK than it is, for example, to attack directly the United States when you're trying to befriend Donald Trump. So I think there are multiple reasons here why the UK is in Russia's crosshairs.
John Lough, thank you so much. John Lough, the head of foreign policy at the New Eurasian Strategies Centre.